Welcome to the Victims and Villains podcast. My name is Josh. This is a podcast, extension of the multimedia nonprofit that talks about mental health through pop culture. Today, I'm going to be sharing my feelings on 3 out of the 4 brand new releases that came out this past weekend, being Trolls Band Together, The Holdovers, and Thanksgiving. But before we jump into that, I just want to also take time to really talk about something else that happened this past weekend. And that would actually be the international holiday that is called International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day. If you guys are new to this content or have never met me at a convention or a film festival, I got into mental health advocacy. Victims and Villains actually started as a result of me actually losing my friend Adam to suicide. So the idea of this day is a international day. It's every year. It's the Saturday before Thanksgiving, and basically organizations from all over the world basically set up events to just kind of do group therapy to honor those that they've lost, to hear stories of others, and it's a giant remembrance of those that are not alone. And so this day was proposed by Senator Harry Reid in 1999. He lost his father to suicide, and it was actually proposed as a resolution here in the United States. And I think it's fascinating that this actually led to one country, kind of essentially an entire world. It's a worldwide thing. Now, January for me will be 15 years since I lost Adam to suicide, and we started Victims and Villains in 2016. This is the first time that I've ever actually attended one of these events, and it is just simply amazing. Um, Without a doubt, this was one of the best resources that I've ever gone through, and it kind of opened up things that I hadn't talked about in several years, and it had opened up feelings that I hadn't allowed to process. And so I'm just gonna be vulnerable with you guys that I know that there are portions of my story that I'm still working on and still responding to that I have just not really addressed up until this point in my life. And part of Adam's suicide is also falls into some of those areas. And so just being able to be around a small group of people that had lost others and that was a reminder that I wasn't alone. And so if you've ever lost anyone to suicide, if you have ever come close to losing a family member, a significant other, a spouse, a partner, a friend, a coworker, whatever the case, I implore you next year to seek out one of these events. This was one of this was a great resource, and I cannot stress that enough. We are all about education and resources here at Victims and Villains, and this was one of the best examples of that. To just kind of be really vulnerable, really real, and it's just a peaceful reminder that you're not alone. And so, on the subject of that, for any of that are not alone, in the next couple of days, we will be updating our mental health resource library to also include resources around survivor suicide loss, because that's something that we don't talk nearly enough about in terms of education or resources. It might be in some of the stories that you hear on this podcast or in our some of our panels or channel, whatever, but it's not a resource that we are actively doing. So I want to apologize on public record for that, and just know that in the next couple of days, with the release of this podcast, that will be rectified. And so if you or someone you know has lost anyone to suicide, I know what you're going through. I know that sounds really cheesy and really cliche to say that, but you're not alone. Yesterday, just being around people that had the same, very similar stories to mine, if not um, a little bit more intense, I can tell you that you're not alone. And so, thank you guys so much for organizations like American Foundation for Suicide Prevention that were creating safe spaces to allow others like myself to heal. Keep this on your calendar for next year. International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day. It is every Saturday before Thanksgiving. And there are also local chapters that you could possibly also look into that are doing either bi-monthly or monthly meetings to also have that same connection of community. And uh, yeah, so just also look into the options because I think going to one of these things, these events was just a reminder of how much healing I still have to left to do, but also the emphasis of just not being alone. So, but if you or someone you know is currently struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, in the show notes below, you guys will find links to our previously mentioned mental health resource library. Let's jump into some thing on a little bit of a lighter note, and that would be Trolls Band Together. So this is the third in the Trolls trilogy or franchise because they've made a bunch of Netflix specials. I have only ever actually seen the first two films, of course, Trolls and Trolls World Tour. I really liked the first film, was not a fan of the second film, so I was kind of coming into this with a little bit of not necessarily mixed expectations, but I also grew up in the 90s. I grew up in the height of NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears, and so I was really curious to see how they were going to bring in this NSYNC reunion, how they were going to bring in the subject of boy bands, and I gotta say, so this movie, let's jump into the synopsis of this movie. So this three cool tells the story of Branch, played by Justin Timberlake. His backstory was he was the member of a world famous troll boy band called Brozone. They broke up and essentially are forced to get back together to stop the evil villains this time around, Velvet and Veneer, who essentially are this universe's version of Milli Vanilli. Now, let me just start off by saying that I thought this film was a lot of fun. I thought this film not only, I think sometimes when you are having these larger than life, I think sometimes when you have these types of family films, they're really, really hard to make films that are going to appeal to parents too. And this is really outside my comfort zone. This is not normally the type of movie that I put into uh, reviewing here at Victims and Villains. But like I said, was a massive NSYNC fan. Having their single Better Place in this movie and even them making cameos in this movie, I really, really was looking forward to this film. And I gotta say, this is probably the best Trolls that we've gotten yet. I think the camaraderie and the implement of music, which I haven't been too big a fan of in the past. I felt like in the past these movies with Trolls and Trolls World Tour, they've overused the music, and here I felt like they found the perfect pacing, balance of story and music. Like it never felt like one was heavy-handed, and I think that's what makes this film the best in the trilogy so far. I really liked the way that this really expanded upon the lore of the Trolls. There's great callbacks to the first two films. There are elements of the very first film that are extended and really refreshing and surprising ways. And it also retains a lot of the heart and the humor from the first two films that fans of this franchise have really come to know. I think that the chemistry between Anna-Kendrick and Justin Timberlake, I've always been the best part of these movies, and it's the best part of this film. I really love how each film really kind of grows the relationship between Poppy and Branch. I thought it was really well done. For me, I think one of the strangest elements of this would perhaps be the subplot with King Gristle and Bridget, who are from the first film. They were in a post-credit scene in the second film, and they kind of have this like weird subplot that exists, and it feels kind of weird the way the film uses it to kind of push it forward. It kind of feels like it's a, hey, you remember these kind of guys? And what they do in actually in the third act with Bridget and King Gristle actually kind of makes it good, but honestly, you probably could have had their first scene and then just have them show up to give them kind of a subplot to justify them as characters on screen. It seems like a really strange choice. It's one of the it's one of the very small issues with the narrative that I have. But overall, I think this is a really solid offering. It's probably one of the best, funniest animations that we've seen this year. I really also have to shout out Kenan Thompson, who just has a lot of really scene-stealing moments in this. He plays Tiny Diamond. He was introduced in the last film. Very small role, very extended role here. He is essentially front and center with Timberlake and Kendrick for the remaining for the majority of this movie. I thought that was a great choice and really made use of Thompson's a ability as an actor, which I kind of feel like was slept on in the previous film. So I want to talk about how this film uses animation because obviously this is a 3D animated film and it really retains a lot of that from the first film, but it's really interesting what they do with the Velvet and Veneer characters because those characters in particular feel completely almost like a different animation style. They feel very much in the vein of Betty Boop or even more recently Cuphead. And I really liked the juxtaposition that they opposed. They kind of feel like they're almost like early 2000s sci-fi Tripping the Rift almost, if you remember that show. It's kind of that's kind of the animation style there. It's very bubbly. It almost kind of feels like it borders balloons. And I thought that it was a very nice, different alternative take on the very bright and having them be really sinister. They're probably the best villains the franchise has seen so far. I thought again, just really, really solid. All right, so let's run this through the Rorschach rating scale. I am gonna go ahead and give Kroll's band together a 3.5 out of 5. Like I said, I think this is the best Trolls we've gotten yet. I really liked the way it expands the mythology. I really liked Timberlake, Kendrick, Thompson, boy band stuff, the villains in this movie, how certain elements of are animated. I'm really now excited coming out of this film with how they will extend the next film. If there happens to be a Trolls 4, I feel like I'm more excited about it now. If it doesn't happen, I feel like I'm fine with that as well. But yeah, so I'm really really curious to see what is going to happen. So if you guys have seen Trolls Band Together, if you guys liked in Sync single Better Place after 20 years. It's hard to believe that it's been 20 years since Celebrity came out, but it is true. What did you guys think about it? Oh, comment below and let me know. You can even comment and let me know your favorite In Sync memory, or if you were In Sync or Backstreet Boys. Like I was both, but I was more In Sync. So jumping into speaking of the era of nostalgia, right in 2004, only a year later, we got this darling of a film called Sideways, and it was the first teaming up of Alexander-Payne and Paul Giamatti. And now they're back with The Holdovers. The Holdovers is a brand new holiday film that depicts a time when a boarding school goes on vacation and some of the students are left behind, and essentially Paul Giamatti's character in this film is left to kind of babysit them with a school nurse played by Davine-Joy-Randpolph. And essentially it comes down to the film eventually ends up coming down to this relationship between Giamatti and uh, on-screen debut of Dominic Sessa. Let's jump in and talk about this movie. This is without a doubt one of the best not only movies of this year, this is also at the same time this has to be the Holdovers will find its way into the Christmas or holiday rotation alongside genre greats like A Christmas Story, Christmas Vacation, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Die Hard, Black Christmas. That list goes on and on and on, and it's gonna change for different people. But essentially, The Holdovers is just such an absolutely remarkable film. Like I cannot speak enough high praises about this film. It firmly plants itself among the greats. It is from its remarkable performances of Paul Giamatti, Divine Joy Randolph, and Dominic Sessa. This trio of actors is just can't say enough great things about them. Like to me, I think that this is it's probably a little bit too early, but we're also getting into that season. I think that there is conversation here for Paul Giamatti to be nominated or at least considered for Best Actor. I think Divine Joy Randolph also has the Best Leading or Best Supporting Actress nominee. Also, and Dominic Sessa, whether he is in the conversation for nominees or not, his performance in this movie is nothing short of absolutely incredible. And I think the reason that I this movie stuck with me so much is because typically Christmas movies in this case, or typically any holiday movies that are around this time, they are they are going after emotions like joy, happiness, things like that, things along those things. But here's the thing that a lot of people either we don't talk enough about or movies don't portray enough is that that's not always the case for everyone in in the world. A lot of people around this time, this is when they've lost family members or friends to you know deaths or suicide or they've had some traumatic events. And I what I love about this film is that this is a film that is addressing those very things. Randolph's character in this movie has just lost her son to uh, the to war. And so her entire arc throughout the course of this movie is trying to navigate what it's like now being a single mother going into a holiday season, into a normally joyous time of the year without her son. And I love how that grief extends to not only her character, but how it also affects Giamatti and Sessa's relationship with her and really performances all around. The party scene in this where is just an absolute example of how much of a tour de force Divine Joy Randolph is as an actress. And this was the first time that I've ever seen her as an actress, and I honestly walked out of this movie wanting to see more of her filmography, wanting to see more of what she's capable of because this performance was just absolutely exceptional. And I think you also have David Hemsing's son's script and Alexander Payne's direction in this that are elevating that performance from Randolph and really finding a way to make it the best performance that it can. And I think the same can be said for Giamatti and Sessa. Sessa, this is his big screen debut. It says it in the opening for this, introducing Dominic Sessa. And again, this is a remarkable, outstanding debut from the young actor. Like, I am really curious to see what he's going to do next because I thought that he gave a really powerful performance in here, and he's balancing this charisma, but also this immense brokenness. And as the film progresses, you understand why this brokenness exists and how these how the arcs of Giamatti and Randolph really pour into that brokenness and react to that brokenness. Again, I think it's what makes this movie such a highlight of the year. And I'm gonna just gonna say it now. This is probably, without a doubt, going to be the best Christmas movie we're gonna see in 2023 and maybe even perhaps in the new this new decade of 2020 that we're currently in. I talked about this in our review for It's a Wonderful Knife, where it feels like we're every year getting more and more Christmas movies now and more films that are vying for that traditional rewatch. And The Holdovers is the first time that I've walked out of a film, wanting to see it again before Christmas, but also at the same time wanting to have it in my rewatch catalog. And at this point, the only movies that I really go back to rewatch now as an adult are Black Christmas and maybe a Christmas Story. But Black Christmas and for some years Krampus also, but this is going to be one that is a non-horror that is going to probably replace Ralphie and a lot of those movies, because this movie is just worth worthy of replacing it and kind of creating new traditions around. And also, I think Giamatti in this movie is, again, I've said it, I think that he is worth getting a Oscar for. I think this is probably one of the best performances of the year. And also, I'm just gonna also say this, that I think the reteaming of him and Alexander-Payne is just awesome. I don't know any other way to say this. I will also just be very clear. I was not the hugest fan of Sideways. I thought it was an okay movie. I also saw it years after it was released, from its hype, from its Oscar buzz, and I really thought Giamatti did a great job. Again, Payne, I have only ever seen this and Sideways, but it feels like both men have learned in the 19 years to harness and elevate their craft and create something that is worth talking about in this year's Oscar buzz. To talk about in this year's conversations about that stuff. So I am gonna go ahead and give, on our Rorschach rating scale, The Holdovers a 4.5 out of 5. I cannot recommend this movie enough. This is just nothing shy of incredible. It's charming. It's heartbreaking. It's paced incredibly well. I love the visual aesthetic of it. I love how it feels like it crawled out of a VCR from the 1970s. It takes place in the 70s. I thought the cinematography in this was absolutely breathtaking. And again, I think that this movie is just, it knows how to find a way to really play with your emotions in its runtime. It breaks your heart several times over. It makes you laugh. The use of comedy in this is just absolutely phenomenal. And again, I feel like I'm running out of synonyms to talk about how great this movie is. So The Holdovers is now playing in theaters everywhere, and we move from one holiday to another for our last film of discussion, and that is Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving is started out as a fake trailer for 2007's Grindhouse film, and is now extended into a full-blown slasher. It tells the story a la Scream of a city that experiences a tragedy at Black Friday. 1 year later, fast forward, a new killer wearing a John Carver mask has emerged and essentially seeks revenge on the people of that evening 1 year ago. I want to start off by saying that this has some of the best gags that we have seen in any horror movie this year. And talking of the conversation of tradition and creating rewatches and traditions with this one. This is definitely going to be one that is going to find its way into my Blu-ray player every Thanksgiving. I thought this movie was an absolute blast. From start to finish, the I just thought it was such an absolute blast. I love how simplistic the character design is. I love how for the first time that we actually have a Thanksgiving movie, because that is not something that we get very often. And to just kind of some of the way that they use Thanksgiving traditions as ways to create kills and gags, I thought was really well done. I thought that Eli Roth, again, a great storyteller. I had a blast with him in this movie. Thought he did a phenomenal job. The cast in and of itself is okay. I'm just gonna say that coming out of coming out of Trolls Band Together and Holdovers, where you had these really unique and standout performances in both of those movies. You don't really have that here. So our main protagonist, we follow Jessica and Bobby, who are played by Nell Verlaque and Jalen Thomas Brooks in this movie. The two have good chemistry and they lead the film well. There's just nothing remarkable about their performance, and that's just the case sometimes. That's just the nature of the beast when it comes to slashers. Is you're coming for the kills. You're coming for the killer. You are not necessarily coming for the performance. And so it's really hard to also kind of talk about the performances in this movie as a whole. I think this movie is paced really well. The performances do a fine enough job to progress the story forward. It's not like there's someone overacting. All the acting is done on the same playing field. And I don't know. This one's really simple. It's really straightforward. There's not a whole lot of depth. I thought again, I just thought the way that they were able to implement some of these Thanksgiving traditions were really well done. And this film just kind of feels like Scream at Thanksgiving, and I really liked that. Scream is one of my favorite franchises, and this was just such a fun time. So I don't really have a whole lot of things to say about this movie, but I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 4 out of 5 on the Rorschach rating scale because I think it's gonna make its way into Thanksgiving traditions. I think for horror fans, this is gonna be a fun rewatch, and who knows? I think also too, like it's gonna be one of those movies that is just gonna kind of find a cult following of its own, and I absolutely just had a blast with this. This movie was insanely fun. It's fun, it's funny, it has really great humor, but also at the same time, it has, um, above all else, this is a major studio releasing a slasher, and it proves that slashers are not dead yet. And if anything, we are in the era of a renaissance of them with original slashers because this is the first original slasher that we've gotten in a long time. Keep in mind that a lot of the slashers we've gotten in recent years have been legacy films with Halloween, Scream, Texas Chainsaw. All of those have been uh, it's legacy or even remakes with Black Christmas. And this is kind of the first one that we've gotten that's been released on a major studio, so go support this film because it's really significant that we get this and we get more original slashers from big studios the way that we did in the 80s. Paramount, again, it's a reminder, Paramount is the original distributor and creator behind Friday the 13th. So go support them. So if you guys have seen any of these movies, Trolls Band Together, The Holdovers, or Thanksgiving, what did you guys think? Comment below. Let me know. Once again, I want to go ahead and plug the International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day. It's going to be every year around um, every Saturday before Thanksgiving every year, and we'll be updating our resources to reflect also this and support groups as well within our resource. So thank you guys for checking out this episode, and make sure that you guys hit subscribe. So until next time, stay classy.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.